The moment a room full of experts laughs at the quietest person in the room is often the moment they reveal how little they actually know. St. Matthew Medical Center was known as one of the busiest hospitals in Chicago. Every day, hundreds of patients moved through its emergency department, and every employee learned quickly that pressure was part of the job. Among the nurses working long shifts was Grace Sullivan, a 34-year-old emergency room nurse known for her calm demeanor, steady hands, and habit of staying out of workplace drama. Most people appreciated her professionalism, but few knew much about her personal life. Grace never talked about her past. She arrived on time, completed her work, helped her coworkers, and went home. In a hospital filled with strong personalities, she seemed almost invisible. Before we continue, thank you for supporting our channel and spending your valuable time with us today. If you enjoy inspiring stories about resilience, hidden strength, and unexpected recognition, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you powerful stories and unforgettable experiences in future videos. That morning began like any other. Ambulances arrived regularly. Monitors beeped throughout the department. Nurses moved quickly between patients while physicians reviewed charts and coordinated treatment plans. Grace was assisting an elderly patient when Dr. Nathan Pierce entered the emergency department. Nathan was one of the hospital's most respected surgeons. He was highly skilled, widely recognized, and fully aware of his reputation. Many employees admired him. Others feared him. Nathan expected efficiency from everyone around him and rarely hid his opinions when he believed someone had fallen short of his standards. During a complicated patient intake discussion, Grace quietly suggested an observation regarding the patient's condition. She spoke respectfully and based her recommendation on information she had gathered during her assessment. Several staff members listened. For a brief moment, the room became quiet. Nathan glanced at her chart, then at Grace. A faint smile appeared on his face. "You are overthinking it," he said. Grace remained calm. "I only wanted to share what I noticed." Nathan shook his head. "You are just a nurse. Leave the medical decisions to the physicians." The words landed heavily across the room. Several nurses looked down at their paperwork. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody said anything. Grace simply nodded and returned to her work. She showed no sign of anger, no sign of embarrassment, no sign of resentment. Yet something about her composure felt unusual. Most people would have reacted. Grace did not. Throughout the rest of the day, she continued helping patients with the same professionalism she always displayed. Late that afternoon, a military helicopter passed across the city skyline. The distant sound briefly echoed through the emergency department windows. For less than a second, Grace looked toward the sound. Her posture subtly changed. Her eyes sharpened. Then the moment disappeared as quickly as it came. A nearby nurse noticed the reaction, but said nothing. Minutes later, Grace returned to caring for patients as though nothing had happened. Nobody knew that the brief glance toward the sky had revealed more about her than any conversation ever could. And nobody in that hospital, especially Dr. Nathan Pierce, had the slightest idea that the quiet nurse he had just humiliated was carrying a past far more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. The following morning, life inside St. Matthew Medical Center continued at its usual relentless pace. Patients filled examination rooms, nurses moved between stations, and physicians hurried through packed schedules. To most people, the uncomfortable exchange between Grace Sullivan and Dr. Nathan Pierce the day before had already become another forgotten workplace moment. But for a few employees, the scene continued to linger in their minds. Not because Grace had argued, not because she had complained, but because she had done neither. Most people reacted when embarrassed. Grace simply continued working as though nothing had happened. That unusual calm began attracting attention. Throughout the day, Grace moved through the emergency department with the same steady professionalism she always displayed. She comforted nervous patients, assisted new nurses, and helped physicians coordinate care during busy shifts. Several times, situations became chaotic. Equipment needed to be relocated quickly. Communication between departments became strained. Yet Grace seemed to anticipate problems before they fully developed. She often positioned herself exactly where she was needed before anyone asked. One younger nurse named Emily began noticing something unusual. Grace never appeared surprised. Alarms sounded, schedules changed, unexpected complications emerged, and still Grace remained composed. It was almost as if she had spent years operating in environments far more stressful than a hospital emergency room. During lunch, a group of nurses gathered in the staff lounge. The conversation eventually shifted toward Grace. "Have you ever noticed how calm she is?" Emily asked. Another nurse nodded. "I have worked here 6 years. I have never seen her panic." Someone laughed softly. "Maybe she just has a lot of experience." Emily considered that possibility, but something still felt different. Experience explained confidence. It did not explain the sharp awareness Grace seemed to carry everywhere she went. Later that afternoon, an announcement came through the hospital communication system regarding a regional emergency preparedness exercise involving military and civilian agencies. Most employees barely paid attention. Grace did. For the briefest moment, she stopped walking. She listened carefully to every detail. Then she immediately resumed working. Once again, the reaction was subtle enough that most people never noticed. But Emily did. Near the end of the shift, Grace was helping move supplies into a treatment area when a heavy storage cart began rolling unexpectedly toward a crowded hallway intersection. Before anyone else reacted, Grace stepped forward and redirected it safely. The movement happened quickly and efficiently. Several nearby employees looked impressed. One orderly laughed. "You reacted faster than security." Grace simply smiled. "Good timing." But the explanation did not entirely satisfy those who witnessed it. Later that evening, Dr. Nathan Pierce encountered Grace in the corridor. He noticed several employees thanking her for assistance during the day. Nathan remained unconvinced by the admiration some staff members seemed to have for her. In his mind, she was still simply a nurse performing routine responsibilities. As he walked away, he overheard someone describe Grace as exceptional under pressure. Nathan shook his head dismissively. Meanwhile, Grace changed out of her scrubs and prepared to leave for the evening. As she reached for her jacket, the sleeve briefly shifted. A faded section of ink became visible near her wrist before disappearing beneath the fabric again. Nobody nearby paid attention. Nobody asked questions. Yet that small glimpse of an old tattoo represented a chapter of her life she had spent years trying to leave behind. And very soon, a single unexpected encounter would make it impossible for that chapter to remain hidden any longer. 3 days later, the emergency department faced one of its busiest afternoons of the month. Every treatment room was occupied. New patients continued arriving. Telephones rang constantly, while medical staff moved quickly between assignments. Despite the pressure surrounding her, Grace Sullivan remained as composed as ever. She worked efficiently, communicated clearly, and seemed unaffected by the growing chaos. More and more employees began noticing the same thing. No matter how stressful the situation became, Grace never appeared overwhelmed. During the middle of the shift, a regional emergency preparedness exercise involving multiple agencies created additional coordination challenges throughout the hospital. Departments were required to adjust procedures, review communication protocols, and respond to rapidly changing instructions. Several employees became frustrated by the constant updates. Grace did not. She listened carefully, absorbed information quickly, and adapted without hesitation. At one point, a physician asked where she had learned to organize complex situations so effectively. Grace smiled politely and replied, "Experience teaches valuable lessons." The answer sounded simple, but it left several people curious. Later that afternoon, Dr. Nathan Pierce entered the emergency department after completing a surgical procedure. He immediately noticed that several staff members seemed unusually reliant on Grace. Questions flowed toward her. Younger nurses sought her guidance. Even experienced employees appeared to trust her judgment. Nathan found the attention excessive. In his mind, Grace was still receiving more credit than she deserved. As he reviewed patient updates, a sudden equipment issue disrupted operations in one section of the department. Several employees began discussing possible solutions. Before anyone could establish a plan, Grace calmly identified the most efficient approach and coordinated the necessary adjustments. Within minutes, normal operations resumed. The speed of her response impressed everyone nearby. Nathan remained unconvinced. "Sometimes confidence is mistaken for expertise," he remarked. Grace simply returned to her work without responding. As the evening approached, a retired military veteran arrived for treatment accompanied by family members. While assisting with intake procedures, Grace spoke with him briefly. The conversation seemed ordinary until the veteran mentioned his years of service. Something changed in Grace's expression. Not dramatically, but enough for observant people to notice. She immediately stood a little straighter and addressed him with a level of respect that felt deeply personal. The veteran noticed it too. Before he could ask any questions, another patient required assistance, and Grace moved away. An hour later, while helping transfer supplies into a treatment area, Grace rolled up her sleeve slightly to adjust a piece of equipment. For only a few seconds, part of an old tattoo became visible near her wrist. It was faded and partially hidden by time, but the design appeared highly specific. Emily, the younger nurse who had already been paying attention to Grace's unusual behavior, noticed it immediately. The tattoo did not look decorative. It looked meaningful. Before Emily could get a better look, the sleeve dropped back into place. Grace continued working as though nothing had happened. Yet the brief glimpse raised even more questions. The calm under pressure, the military awareness, the unusual discipline, the mysterious tattoo. Individually, none of the details seemed significant. Together, they suggested a story nobody knew. And less than 24 hours later, someone would walk into St. Matthew Medical Center and recognize exactly what that tattoo meant. The next afternoon seemed ordinary at first. Patients arrived, physicians moved between departments, and nurses carried on with their responsibilities. Grace Sullivan spent most of the day assisting patients and helping newer staff members navigate the demands of the emergency department. After years of experience, she had become one of the people others naturally turned to during difficult moments. Even so, she remained quiet, never seeking attention or recognition. Late in the day, an older man entered the hospital accompanied by another veteran. They had come to visit a longtime friend recovering from a medical condition. Both men carried themselves with a discipline that immediately suggested military experience. As they walked through the hospital corridors, they exchanged stories and memories from years of service. Eventually, they stopped near the nurse's station to ask for directions. Grace happened to be nearby organizing patient files. She greeted them politely and offered assistance. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Then something unexpected happened. As Grace reached for a folder on a nearby counter, the sleeve of her uniform shifted slightly. For the briefest moment, part of the faded tattoo near her wrist became visible. One of the veterans froze. His eyes immediately locked onto the design. The expression on his face changed completely. Grace noticed it at once. Calmly, she adjusted her sleeve and continued speaking as though nothing had happened. The veteran remained silent for several seconds. After Grace walked away, his companion noticed his reaction. "What is it?" he asked quietly. The older man continued staring in the direction Grace had gone. "That tattoo," he finally said. "There is no way." His companion frowned. "You know what it means?" The veteran nodded slowly. "I know exactly what it means." Throughout the rest of the visit, he appeared distracted. Several times he glanced toward the emergency department, hoping to see Grace again. But she remained busy helping patients and never approached him. Before leaving the hospital, he stopped near the entrance and made a phone call. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. During that time, his serious expression became even more intense. "I am telling you," he said. "I saw it myself." A long pause followed. "Yes, I am absolutely certain." After ending the call, he left the hospital without explaining anything further. Meanwhile, inside the emergency department, rumors were beginning to spread. Emily noticed the veteran's reaction and mentioned it to a few coworkers. Nobody understood what had happened. Some thought the man had mistaken Grace for someone else. Others assumed the tattoo represented an old military unit. Grace refused to answer any questions. Whenever someone brought up the subject, she politely redirected the conversation. Her refusal only increased the mystery. Later that evening, Dr. Nathan Pierce overheard several employees discussing the incident. He dismissed the speculation immediately. "People enjoy creating stories," he said. "There is nothing mysterious about a nurse with an old tattoo." Most people accepted his explanation. Yet even Nathan could not ignore the growing curiosity throughout the hospital. Something about Grace Sullivan clearly did not fit the image everyone had formed of her. As night settled over Chicago, another phone call was taking place hundreds of miles away. The veteran who had recognized the tattoo was speaking with individuals who knew exactly who Grace was. And after hearing what he had seen, they made a decision. They were coming to St. Matthew Medical Center. The following week brought an unexpected shift in the atmosphere at St. Matthew Medical Center. Although most employees continued focusing on their daily responsibilities, whispers about Grace Sullivan seemed to appear everywhere. The mysterious tattoo, the veteran who had recognized it, the strange phone call. No one had answers, but curiosity continued growing. Grace, however, remained exactly the same. She arrived early, cared for patients, helped coworkers, and avoided every attempt to draw attention toward herself. If she noticed the rumors, she gave no indication. Unfortunately, curiosity was not the only thing spreading through the hospital. A few days after the veteran's visit, an administrative review was launched regarding a recent documentation issue involving patient records. The problem itself was minor, but because several departments had been involved, leadership wanted accountability. During the review process, questions eventually reached Grace's unit. She cooperated fully and provided every detail requested. At first, she assumed the matter would be resolved quickly. Instead, the situation took an unexpected turn. During a leadership meeting, Dr. Nathan Pierce argued that stricter standards were needed. Although multiple employees had participated in the workflow being examined, Nathan repeatedly focused attention on Grace's role. Several managers seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the discussion, but few challenged him directly. Grace's reputation for staying silent often worked against her. People knew she would not defend herself aggressively. As the review continued, pressure began building around her. Coworkers who respected Grace privately expressed concern. Emily, in particular, struggled to understand why so much attention was being directed towards someone known for professionalism and reliability. Yet the administrative process continued moving forward. 3 days later, Grace was called into a meeting with hospital leadership. The conversation was polite but deeply disappointing. Pending further review, she was being placed on temporary suspension. The decision shocked many employees. Grace listened quietly as administrators explained their reasoning. She asked a few professional questions, signed the necessary paperwork, and left the room with the same calm dignity she had always displayed. Word spread quickly throughout the hospital. Some employees could not believe it. Others assumed there must be information they did not know. Nathan appeared satisfied that leadership had taken action. To him, the decision represented accountability. To others, it felt unfair. That evening, Grace returned home carrying a small box containing personal items from her locker. The walk to her apartment felt longer than usual. For years, she had devoted herself to helping others. Now she found herself sitting alone at her kitchen table wondering how everything had changed so quickly. Yet even then, she refused to blame anyone. She simply hoped the truth would eventually emerge. Meanwhile, events beyond her knowledge were already unfolding. Hundreds of miles away, several former military personnel had continued discussing the tattoo identified by the veteran at the hospital. The more information they confirmed, the more astonished they became. One individual finally contacted a former team leader. After hearing Grace Sullivan's name, the man became completely silent. Then he asked only one question. "Are you absolutely certain it was her?" The answer came immediately. Yes. Within 24 hours, travel arrangements were made. Back in Chicago, Grace prepared for another uncertain day away from the hospital she loved. She believed she was facing the lowest point of her career. What she did not know was that several vehicles were already heading toward the city, and the people inside them had no intention of allowing her story to remain hidden any longer. 2 days after her suspension, Grace Sullivan sat alone at a small coffee shop several blocks from her apartment. The uncertainty surrounding her future remained difficult to ignore, but she refused to allow disappointment to define her. She spent the morning reviewing job opportunities and updating professional documents. If her career at St. Matthew Medical Center was truly ending, she intended to move forward with dignity. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, curiosity had reached an entirely new level. Employees continued discussing the mysterious veteran who had recognized Grace's tattoo. Most assumed the story would eventually fade away like every other workplace rumor. Nobody expected what happened next. Shortly after 9 o'clock that morning, several dark vehicles entered the hospital parking area. Their arrival immediately attracted attention. Security personnel noticed them first. Then reception staff. Within minutes, employees throughout the building began exchanging confused looks as several visitors entered the main lobby together. The group carried themselves with quiet confidence and unmistakable discipline. They were not loud. They were not demanding. Yet their presence alone changed the atmosphere. One of the visitors approached the reception desk and politely asked a question. "We are looking for Grace Sullivan." The receptionist glanced at the group before explaining that Grace was currently suspended and not on site. The man thanked her and exchanged a look with the others. Several employees nearby overheard the conversation. Within minutes, the news spread across the hospital. The visitors were not ordinary guests. Many appeared to have military backgrounds. Some employees began connecting the situation to the tattoo and the veteran from the previous week. Confusion quickly turned into fascination. Dr. Nathan Pierce first heard about the visitors while leaving a meeting. Assuming it was another exaggerated rumor, he initially ignored it. Then he noticed several department managers gathered near the lobby windows watching the group. Curious, he walked downstairs himself. What he saw surprised him. The visitors were calm, respectful, and professional. Yet there was something unusual about the way people responded to them. Hospital employees seemed instinctively aware that these individuals carried significant experience and authority. Nathan approached one of the men and asked if there had been some misunderstanding. The visitor politely introduced himself, but offered very few details. Nathan then asked why they were looking for Grace. For a brief moment, the man studied him carefully. "Because she matters," he replied. Nathan frowned. "She is a nurse." The visitor's expression changed slightly. Not with anger, not with hostility, simply disbelief. Several members of the group exchanged glances. Finally, another man stepped forward. "With respect, doctor," he said calmly, "you have no idea who she is." The words immediately captured the attention of everyone within hearing distance. Nathan stood silently. For the first time since meeting Grace, uncertainty entered his mind. Throughout the hospital, rumors intensified. Employees wanted answers. Administrators wanted explanations. Yet the visitors revealed almost nothing. They simply requested a meeting and waited patiently. Later that afternoon, hospital leadership arranged a private conference room for the group. Several executives attended, hoping to understand why so many accomplished military professionals had traveled across the country searching for a suspended emergency room nurse. As the meeting began, one visitor carefully placed a folder on the table. Inside were photographs, commendations, and records that very few civilians had ever seen. The room became silent. And at that moment, the process of uncovering Grace Sullivan's true identity finally began. The private conference room remained completely silent as the visitors opened the folder and began placing photographs across the table. Hospital executives leaned forward. Department managers exchanged uncertain glances. Dr. Nathan Pierce stood near the back of the room with his arms folded, still struggling to understand why so much attention was suddenly focused on Grace Sullivan. One of the visitors, a gray-haired former team leader, carefully selected the first photograph and slid it toward the center of the table. The image showed a younger Grace wearing military gear beside a group of service members. She looked different, not because of her appearance, but because of the confidence visible in her posture. The room became even quieter. Another photograph followed. Then another. Some showed training environments. Others showed humanitarian support missions and medical operations. Several contained commendations and certificates issued over many years of service. The hospital leadership team studied each item carefully. Nobody spoke. Finally, one administrator looked up and asked the question everyone was thinking. Who exactly is Grace Sullivan? The former team leader smiled faintly. That depends on who is asking. He paused before continuing. To most of you, she is a nurse. To us, she is one of the most respected combat medical specialists we ever worked with. Several executives exchanged stunned looks. Nathan's expression hardened with disbelief. The visitor continued calmly. Grace had spent years serving in highly demanding military environments. She had completed advanced medical training, participated in critical humanitarian support assignments, and earned the respect of personnel whose standards were among the highest in the world. Yet according to the men sitting in the room, her greatest quality was not skill. It was character. One after another, the visitors shared stories. They described someone who consistently placed the needs of others before her own comfort. Someone who remained calm when everyone else felt overwhelmed. Someone who never asked for recognition and rarely spoke about personal accomplishments. The more they talked, the more difficult it became for anyone in the room to reconcile those stories with the quiet nurse they thought they knew. Then the former team leader revealed the meaning of the tattoo. It was not decorative. It represented a chapter of service shared by a very small community of people. For those who recognized it, the symbol immediately communicated years of sacrifice, training, and commitment. Grace had hidden it for a reason. She never wanted her past to define her. She wanted her actions in the present to speak for themselves. That revelation struck several people particularly hard. They suddenly remembered countless moments when Grace had demonstrated unusual awareness, discipline, and composure. The clues had always been there. Nobody had connected them. Nathan remained silent. For the first time since this process began, he felt genuinely unsettled. He remembered dismissing Grace's observations. He remembered publicly telling her she was just a nurse. Now he realized how little he actually knew about the woman standing behind that title. The former team leader then placed one final photograph on the table. It showed Grace receiving recognition during her military career. The room stared at the image. The contrast between perception and reality could not have been greater. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part was that Grace had never mentioned any of it. Not once. As the meeting concluded, hospital leadership sat quietly processing everything they had learned. Meanwhile, across the city, Grace remained completely unaware that her hidden past had finally been revealed. She believed her suspension remained the biggest challenge in her life. What she did not know was that the people who had just shared her story were not finished. The truth had finally emerged. Now came the moment when the entire hospital would be forced to confront it. The day after the private meeting, the atmosphere inside St. Matthew Medical Center felt completely different. Although many employees still did not know the full story, rumors had spread throughout the building. Administrators who had attended the meeting spoke carefully and avoided discussing details, but their behavior had changed. The confidence with which they once viewed the suspension of Grace Sullivan had been replaced by visible uncertainty. Meanwhile, the former military personnel remained in Chicago. They were not interested in publicity. They were not interested in attention. They simply wanted the truth to be known. Hospital leadership eventually agreed to hold a formal gathering involving department heads, administrators, and key staff members. The purpose was simple. Everyone deserved to understand who Grace Sullivan really was. On the morning of the event, employees filled a large conference auditorium inside the hospital. Nurses, physicians, technicians, and administrators took their seats. Curiosity hung in the air. Dr. Nathan Pierce sat near the front. For perhaps the first time in years, he felt completely unsure of what would happen next. As the presentation began, the former team leader stepped onto the stage. Behind him, a screen displayed photographs from Grace's years of service. The room immediately became silent. One by one, stories were shared. They were not stories of recognition or fame. They were stories of dedication, sacrifice, and responsibility. The audience learned how Grace had spent years providing advanced medical care in demanding environments. They learned how she had supported humanitarian missions and worked alongside highly trained personnel who trusted her judgment completely. Most importantly, they learned that she had never spoken about any of it after returning to civilian life. Several nurses in the audience appeared emotional. They recognized the same qualities being described on stage. The calm under pressure, the selflessness, the professionalism. They had seen those characteristics every day without realizing where they came from. Then one of the visitors spoke about Grace's character. He explained that among all her accomplishments, the thing most respected by those who served with her was her humility. She never wanted special treatment, he said. She believed service was its own reward. The room remained completely quiet. Dr. Nathan Pierce lowered his eyes. Every word seemed directed at assumptions he now regretted making. The presentation continued for nearly an hour. By the end, the image many people had carried of Grace Sullivan no longer existed. In its place stood a far more complete picture. She was not simply a nurse. She was a person who had spent years serving others, both inside and outside the hospital, while asking for nothing in return. After the presentation ended, hospital leadership met privately. The discussion was brief. Evidence from the administrative review was reconsidered. Testimony from co-workers was examined. Questions were finally asked that should have been asked from the beginning. The conclusion became unavoidable. Grace had been treated unfairly. Later that afternoon, a decision was reached. The suspension would be reversed. Additional recognition would follow. Yet one final step remained. There was still someone who needed to address what had happened. As employees slowly left the auditorium, Nathan remained seated alone. He stared at the empty stage for several minutes. The confidence that once defined him had been replaced by reflection. He understood now that he had judged someone without understanding her. He had dismissed wisdom because it came from a person whose title seemed smaller than his own. Quietly, he stood and walked toward the exit. Tomorrow, the entire hospital would gather once more. And in front of everyone, Nathan Pierce would have to decide what kind of leader he truly wanted to be. The following morning, employees from every department gathered inside the largest auditorium at St. Matthew Medical Center. The atmosphere felt unlike anything the hospital had experienced before. Nurses filled entire rows. Physicians stood along the walls. Administrators occupied seats near the front. Everyone had heard fragments of the story. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Grace Sullivan arrived quietly, expecting a routine administrative meeting. She had no idea that hospital leadership had arranged something entirely different. As she entered the room, conversations gradually faded. Dozens of people turned toward her. The attention made her uncomfortable. She took a seat near the back and waited. Moments later, the hospital director stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. He spoke briefly about professionalism, integrity, and the importance of recognizing those who serve others without seeking attention. Then he invited Grace to come forward. Confused, she slowly walked toward the stage. The audience watched in complete silence. Once Grace reached the front, the director announced that the review leading to her suspension had been completed. After examining all available information, leadership had determined that the decision had been unfair. Effective immediately, her suspension was fully reversed. A wave of applause filled the auditorium. Grace looked genuinely surprised. Yet the recognition was only beginning. The director continued by acknowledging her years of service both inside and outside the hospital. Several of the former military personnel who had traveled to Chicago were then invited onto the stage. One by one, they spoke about Grace's character. They described her humility, her professionalism, and her unwavering commitment to helping others. None of them focused on titles or achievements. Instead, they focused on the person she had always been. Many employees found themselves deeply moved by the stories. Then came the moment nobody expected. Dr. Nathan Pierce stood and walked slowly toward the stage. The room became completely silent. Nathan paused beside Grace and faced the audience. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke honestly. He admitted that he had judged Grace based on assumptions. He acknowledged that he had dismissed her opinions and underestimated her value. Most importantly, he apologized directly to her in front of everyone. The apology was sincere. Grace listened quietly. When Nathan finished, she simply nodded and thanked him. There was no anger in her response. No desire for revenge. Only grace and dignity. That reaction affected the audience even more than the apology itself. The room erupted into applause once again. Employees stood from their seats. Nurses cheered. Physicians applauded. Administrators smiled. For the first time since she had joined the hospital, Grace found herself receiving the recognition she had never sought. As the event concluded, many employees approached her personally. Some thanked her for helping them over the years. Others shared stories of moments when her guidance had made a difference. Grace accepted every kind word with the same humility she had always shown. Later that afternoon, she returned to the emergency department. The hallways looked exactly the same. The monitors still beeped. Patients still needed care. Yet something had changed. People no longer saw an invisible nurse walking through the corridors. They saw a woman whose character had earned the respect of everyone around her. And as Grace returned to helping patients, the lesson remained clear for all who witnessed her journey. The quietest person in the room may be carrying a story far greater than anyone could ever imagine. As the day came to a close and the respect she had earned finally stood in the open for everyone to see, there was a quiet reminder that some of the strongest people in the world are often the ones nobody notices at first. Stories like this are not really about titles, uniforms, wealth, or status. They are about character. They are about the people who keep showing up, keep doing the right thing, and keep helping others even when nobody is watching. If you stayed with us until the end of this journey, thank you. Your time, your support, and your presence mean more than words can express. Every view, every comment, every shared story helps this community continue to grow. Here on The Hidden Nurse, we celebrate the overlooked heroes, the underestimated women, the quiet professionals, and the extraordinary people whose true value is often hidden beneath ordinary appearances. Our stories are built around courage, resilience, sacrifice, second chances, and those unforgettable moments when the truth finally comes to light. If you enjoy stories where kindness is stronger than arrogance, where perseverance overcomes doubt, and where hidden strength earns the recognition it deserves, then you are in the right place. The Hidden Nurse is a place for viewers who believe that integrity matters, that compassion matters, and that the people who quietly carry the heaviest burdens deserve to be seen. We are grateful for every member of this growing audience from across America and around the world. Your encouragement inspires us to continue bringing you powerful stories filled with emotion, hope, determination, and unforgettable moments of recognition. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It is a simple action that makes a tremendous difference and helps us continue creating more stories for viewers like you. Be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a future story from The Hidden Nurse. We would also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from and share what part of this story stayed with you the most. Thank you once again for listening, for supporting the channel, and for being part of this incredible community. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of the people around you, and never underestimate the quiet person in the room. Sometimes they are carrying a story the world has not discovered yet.